The seaside town arrival, getting there. The journey always started earlier than it needed to. Packed into the car by 6 a.m, boots stuffed with windbreaks, buckets, towels, and a cool box that never stayed cold. No motorway service stations like now. Just laybys with portable toilets and a flask of tea your mum had made the night before. Sandwiches wrapped in foil, always egg or cheese, slightly warm by the time you ate them. Traffic hit once you reached the coast roads. Every town centre became a bottleneck, caravans crawling at 20 mph apiece, coaches blocking junctions, everyone heading to the same stretch of beach. You'd park on a grass verge near the seafront if you were lucky, or a field someone had turned into an impromptu car park for a fiver. The smell arrived before you saw the sea, salt air cut with diesel fumes from idling engines and fish and chip vans already frying by mid-morning. Caravan parks were full by 9 a.m, families unloading deck chairs and windbreaks, kids running toward the sand before their parents had even locked the car. It took an hour to get there and felt like 3. The beach itself, sand, deck chairs, windbreaks. The British seaside was never the golden sand from postcards. It was grey, slightly gritty, and stuck to everything. You'd rent deck chairs by the hour from a bloke with a ticket machine strapped to his waist, wooden frames with striped canvas that sagged in the middle and left marks on the backs of your legs, and windbreaks that families hammered into the sand with mallets, though they never stayed upright for long because the wind off the sea was relentless and would knock them flat within 20 minutes, sending towels and crisp packets tumbling down the beach. Kids queued for donkey rides, 5 minutes plodding along the waterline on animals that looked permanently exhausted, while ice cream vans parked at the top of the beach sold 99 flakes with a chocolate stick jammed in at an angle, soft serve that melted faster than you could eat it. Punch and Judy shows still happened in striped booths, crowds of kids sitting cross-legged in the sand watching puppets hit each other with sticks, which somehow passed as entertainment, and swimming meant wading into freezing water that turned your lips blue and made your legs ache, though everyone did it anyway because you'd come all this way and weren't going home without getting in the sea. The pier and slot machines. And the pier always creaked underfoot, wooden boards worn smooth by decades of foot traffic, gaps between planks wide enough to see the grey water sloshing below. The slot machine arcades ran the full length. Some piers had 50 or 60 machines packed into rooms that smelled of hot metal and fried onions, from the burger stall operating through a hatch next door. The 2p pushers were most popular. You'd feed copper coins in and watch them tumble onto a moving shelf that shoved piles toward the edge, hoping for a cascade that never quite came. One-armed bandits lined the walls, fruit machines paying out in 10p pieces if you were lucky, though odds were set so tight most people left with empty pockets. The grab the teddy claws were rigged. Everyone knew it. The claw's grip weakened the moment it lifted, dropping prizes back regardless of positioning. What the butler saw machines still lurked in back corners, Victorian peep shows where you'd drop a coin and turn a handle to watch grainy black and white cards flip past, supposedly risque but mostly just women in Edwardian bathing costumes. Winning a handful of copper felt like genuine wealth, pockets jangling with 2p pieces, fingers smelling of warm metal. Fish and chips in newspaper. Fish and chips were never actually wrapped in newspaper, that's the myth. They were wrapped in plain white paper first, then newspaper on the outside, which still left your fingers smelling of ink and grease, but kept the food safe from print chemicals, though most people remember it wrong and swear they ate straight off the sports pages. The practice stopped in the 1980s when food hygiene laws tightened. The chips scalded your mouth, every time. Wooden forks snapped if you pressed too hard, which happened constantly because the batter was thick. You'd sit on a seafront wall, legs dangling, balancing the paper parcel while seagulls circled overhead. And if you looked away for even a second, they'd swoop and snatch chips straight from your hand. Salt and vinegar came from glass bottles with rusted metal caps, shaken over everything until the chips were soggy. Some Scarborough shops still used malt vinegar poured from wooden barrels through a funnel. Whether that actually tasted better or just felt more authentic, who knows? The amusement arcade, fruit machines and bingo. People think amusement arcades were designed for families, but they were really just legal gambling halls that happened to let kids in. The fruit machines operated on a payout ratio of roughly 70-80%, meaning the house kept 20-30p per pound, which adds up fast when a busy arcade had 40 or 50 machines running from morning until midnight during summer. The rooms were dark, deliberately so, with flashing lights providing most illumination, and smoke hung in the air thick enough to see drifting through the neon glow because nobody questioned filling enclosed spaces with cigarette smoke, while children played video games. Kids lined up for Space Invaders or Pac-Man, 50p for 3 lives, while parents stood at one-armed bandits feeding in 10p pieces, pulling levers, watching reels spin, occasionally winning coins that clattered into metal trays loud enough to make everyone nearby think someone had hit the jackpot. which was the point, a psychological trick to keep people playing. Electronic bingo callers sat in corners announcing numbers while pensioners dabbed cards, though whether anyone actually won. By the 1990s, most arcades started installing claw machines to attract families. Blackpool Illuminations, the switch-on event. The Blackpool Illuminations used over 1 million light bulbs by the 1980s, which sounds excessive until you actually saw them stretched along 6 miles of seafront. It wasn't just decoration, it was the town's entire economy for 3 months. The lights went up in late August, tested for weeks, then switched on in September with a ceremony that drew crowds 4 deep along the promenade, though the celebrity pressing the button was usually someone from a soap opera nobody outside Britain had heard of. Trams covered in lights, cartoon characters made from bulbs, giant tableau. You'd drive along the prom in traffic that crawled at walking pace. Windows down even if it was cold, because sitting in a sealed car felt wrong when the whole point was being part of the spectacle. Miles of cars inching forward, radios playing, kids leaning out windows pointing at displays they'd seen 100 times but never got tired of. It felt like Christmas in autumn, which was strange because nothing about it was festive in the traditional sense. Just lights and crowds and the sea air cutting through everything. Did the displays actually change much year to year, or did people just not care because the ritual mattered more than the novelty? The pleasure beach, rides and atmosphere. The Big Dipper's wooden frame creaked audibly during the climb, loud enough that you could hear it over the screaming. The roller coaster at Blackpool Pleasure Beach was built in 1923, which meant by the 1980s it was already 60 years old and felt every bit of it. Wooden supports that flexed when the cars passed, joints that rattled, the whole structure swaying slightly in strong wind, though apparently that was within safety margins. Rides ran on diesel generators. You could smell it mixing with candy floss. The ghost train used actors in rubber masks jumping out at timed intervals, which sounds cheap but worked every time because the darkness and the rattling cart put people on edge before anything actually happened. Queues stretched for an hour during peak season. The log flume always had the longest wait. Hooker duck stalls handed out goldfish in plastic bags as prizes. Live fish, not toys. Which meant families left the park carrying bags of water with fish swimming in circles. No plan for what to do with them once they got home. Some fairgrounds in the Midlands used similar setups but with different prizes. The whole place looked tatty. Peeling paint, faded signage, rides that seemed held together by hope. It felt thrilling anyway. Souvenir shops, sticks of rock, postcards, tat. Souvenir shops weren't unique. They were clones. Every single one selling identical tat with the town name swapped out. And somehow that repetition was part of the appeal because you knew exactly what you'd find before you even walked through the door. Which meant no disappointments, just the comforting predictability of seaside commerce that had barely changed since the 1950s. Sticks of rock with the town name running through the middle. A manufacturing trick involving layered sugar that somehow kept the letters readable no matter where you bit. Though most kids just sucked the ends until the rock went sharp and sticky. Terrible. Postcards with jokes nobody laughed at. Cartoons of fat men in striped bathing suits, double entendres about donkeys. The kind of humour that felt ancient even then. Inflatable hammers that squeaked when you hit someone. Kiss-me-quick hats that sat on racks unworn, because nobody, not even tourists trying to blend in, actually put them on their heads. Fridge magnets shaped like fish or lighthouses appeared in the 1980s as kitchens started having more metal surfaces worth decorating. Plastic buckets and spades stacked by the door, ready for the beach, and everything. Shelves, stock, air, smelled faintly of cheap rubber mixed with decades of accumulated dust that no amount of sweeping ever shifted. The shops made their money in summer and closed half the year. The seafront cafes, greasy spoons and tea. And the cafes looked exactly the same whether you were in Scarborough or Skegness, which was either comforting or depressing depending on your mood. They'd been serving the same meals since the 1960s, and nothing about the menu or decor suggested anyone had considered updating either. All-day breakfast for $2.50, eggs, bacon, sausage, beans, toast, fried bread if you asked, served on plates so hot they burned your fingers when the waitress slid them across the formica table, which was pale green or sometimes orange, chipped at the edges, sticky no matter how recently it had been wiped. The tea was strong enough to stain the mug brown within seconds, brewed in enormous metal pots that sat on the counter all day, getting darker and more bitter as the hours passed. Vinyl seats had splits showing yellow foam underneath, and condensation ran down the windows in thick streams because the heating was always too high and the ventilation non-existent, which meant the glass fogged up completely, and you couldn't see the seafront, even though that was supposedly the view you were paying for. Ketchup came in glass bottles with crusted caps that wouldn't pour no matter how hard you shook them, and the radio played in the background, usually Radio 2, sometimes a local station, while staff who'd clearly worked there for decades moved between tables with the energy of people who'd stopped caring about customer service sometime around 1975. The whole experience felt utilitarian, which was fine, because nobody expected charm from a greasy spoon, though the tea was genuinely excellent. The drive home. Sunburnt, tired, broke. Leaving at 5 p.m. to beat the traffic never worked because everyone else had the same idea. The car park exit became a bottleneck. Queues 20 cars deep, engines idling, tempers fraying as families tried to maneuver out of grass fields turned into makeshift parking by enterprising locals who charged $3 and disappeared by nightfall. Some sources claim the traffic leaving Blackpool on a summer Sunday stretched back 5 miles by 6 p.m. Though other accounts say 3, and whether that's because road layouts changed or memories exaggerate is unclear. Sunburnt shoulders, sandy shoes, pockets full of loose change from arcade machines that nobody bothered counting. The car smelled of vinegar from leftover chips mixed with sun cream that had melted onto upholstery, a combination that lingered for days no matter how many times you wound the windows down. Kids fell asleep in the back within 10 minutes, faces pressed against seatbelts, occasionally waking to ask, "Are we there yet?" before drifting off again. Parents argued about whether the day had been worth the money, petrol, parking, food, rides, souvenirs all adding up to more than planned, though the answer was always yes even when they claimed otherwise because complaining about the cost was part of the ritual, a way of processing exhaustion without admitting you'd had a good time. The M6 opened in stages through the 1960s and 70s, which meant by the 1980s the drive home was faster than it had been a decade earlier, though you wouldn't know it from the complaints. Next year's trip was usually discussed before reaching the motorway.